Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is trainer education, and we're going to discuss when a client is in a slump. So this does happen. So even ourselves as trainers, we even have kind of moments where our training is highly motivated. We're super excited. We're going into the gym with a fire in our belly and everything's ready to go. So mentally and physically and whatnot. And then we all have times where we're not always ready to go. So we have a million things going on in our lives. We're overwhelmed with this thing and that thing, low on sleep, low on food, high on stress. So there are ups and downs even in our training. And this is of a person, if you're a trainer, who training is like one of your highest degrees of passion. It's one of the things that excites you the most in life. And yet we still have ups and downs. So with our clients who tend not to be as passionate as we are, so they have ups and downs, it's kind of a little more impactful for them. Because often for a client to get motivated to work out, that was already effort. To whereas our default mode is already motivated, their default mode is not. So having clients have ups and downs is absolutely going to happen, totally normal. And understanding that it isn't their passion can help you understand how to be more compassionate when they're having some downtimes. So, what I wanted to make this podcast about was just what happens if a client comes in and their sessions haven't been going that well lately. So you don't really have like a set number of sessions. It's just been, a couple sessions. They maybe had like some bad ones, or it's been kind of hit and miss lately. Just things have not been going well. And what can you do to address that? What is within your control? So, as trainers, and if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably going to be one of the trainers who are more compassionate about helping people than just kind of fulfilling, like, the person came in, they came out, I got paid, boom, done. So, we're going to be actually kind of like caring whether they actually, got something from the session. So, what tends to happen then is you tend to take the burden of responsibility on yourself when clients aren't doing well. So, what I wanted to do in this podcast was to kind of cover what is like something you can consider yourself responsible for, and then what are the things you're not responsible for? Like how much should we burden ourselves when a client's session isn't going well? So the first thing we want to do, and this whole uh, podcast would be of the assumption that your training program for the client is correct, meaning that they're not having bad sessions because you're doing incorrect exercises for them, or they're not having bad sessions because you're like asking them to do too much. So that is going to be maybe a whole different podcast, and that'd be hard to address because if you I'll do that. I'll put that into a separate podcast. So, but today's is going to be about if we've been doing well normally, and then all of a sudden you fall into a slump. So if you've been doing well normally, that it kind of implies that the program must have been good enough. So there's a lot of, as I just start talking here, I realize there's a lot of situations in which there might be things outside of just this podcast that'll influence whether they're doing well. So let's start with this podcast. Let's get some of your feedback, and then I'll make another podcast. So, for example, I was just thinking in my mind is what happens if you set up a program that was good for them at first, and then they kind of outgrew the program, or like it plateaued. So that would be stuff we're not going to discuss here today. We're talking more about kind of some other factors like food, sleep, stress, maybe what you can do with the workouts, like lessening the workload, changing the workload, maybe addressing their mindset, and then maybe sometimes like when do you have to actually cut a client. So we'll discuss that stuff today. If we get good feedback on this podcast and people have any kind of specific questions, we'll come back to this again, and then maybe kind of discuss how do you know if a client outgrew their program, or how do you know if the program is overwhelming them, and that's why you're running into issues. So I guess with this one today is you would see this as they don't have progression issues. They could progress if they wanted to, if they showed up and they had a good mindset, but they're just coming in and they're worn out, they're tired, they're not super motivated, just like it just is not going well. emotionally, mentally, and energy wise. So let's look at that. So the first thing we want to look at is outside of the gym factors, and that would be food, sleep, and stress. So for food, sometimes what happens is if the client is, say they're trying to do like weight loss or fat loss, they'll undereat. So you definitely, if you're a trainer, you should be giving them some nutrition advice. Doesn't mean you have to give, like legalistic things that you're afraid you're going to get sued for or something. But you should be telling them general good, healthy nutrition stuff. And you can always promote them to our podcast. So we have podcast number 41, which is titled Diet Right, What Matters Most. And then we have and within that one, we have other podcasts and stuff mentioned. But we have a podcast about calories, which is number 153. We have a podcast about protein intake, which is number 33. We have a podcast about meal timing, which is 249. Podcast about meal frequency, which is 329. So I'll include all these in the show notes. But there are sources out there that even if you don't want to have any kind of responsibility to giving the nutrition advice because you don't feel like you're adequate knowledge and or certified, you have resources that you can send them to. So you should at least be sending them somewhere to get information, even if you don't want to give the information to them yourself. Okay. So what needs to be addressed is calories. If they're under eating their calories severely because they're trying to lose weight, they're not going to be fueled well for the day, let alone the workout. And that's going to be part of the problem of why they don't have any energy or any motivation, or things just aren't going well. So you want to make sure they're eating adequate calories. Okay. Then you want to make sure they're eating enough protein. So if they say like they're coming into the workouts and they're just still always sore all the time, and you've given them at least 48 hours in between training the same muscles, so you give them like 2, maybe 3 days, and they're just really sore, really tired. Again, that could be lower calorie intake, and it also can be just insufficient protein. So we have podcast number 33 that talks about how much protein they should have. So you want to make sure they're getting adequate calories, which is podcast 153. Make sure they're getting adequate protein, which is podcast 33. And then make sure they're paying attention to their meal timing, meaning, if they come in to work out at noon and they haven't eaten anything since they woke up at 6 a.m., things aren't going to go well. They have no gas in their gas tank. Okay. So you have to make sure that they're fueling their body to be used. So they have to have the majority of their calories kind of around their workout time, like leading up to the workout. Maybe even you do an intra-workout drink and then a post-workout meal. So wherever their most active time of the day is where their most calories should be. So we talk about that in podcast 249 about meal timing. And then podcast 329 about meal frequency just kind of lets them know how many times a day they should eat, depending on different situations and lifestyles and whatnot. So that's the first stuff you want to address. And it kind of makes sense. Like if I want to drive my car, I have to first see if there's gas in the dang thing. So that's something to pay attention to. Okay. And then sleep is another thing. So we have podcast 376 about improving sleep quality. So if they're having sleep issues and they say they're only sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, you can kind of talk to them, like go listen to podcast 376 and talk to them about improving their sleep quality. See if there's factors they can kind of address or things they can do to help them sleep better. So again, if we think back to a car analogy, sleep is kind of how our body repairs itself. It's maintenance. So again, we can't run a car, even if we have gasoline in it, we can't run it forever without ever checking up on it, without ever taking care of it with, rotating the tires, checking the oil, all that stuff. So same thing with the body is we need food for fuel and we need sleep for recovery and repair. So you have to make sure they're getting those two things. So if they're eating adequately and they have good sleep, that is overwhelmingly going to be the two biggest issues why most people don't do well, like why clients will run into slumps. Okay. Another one is stress. So they'll have just crap going on in their life that seems, kind of like spikes out of nowhere, or it kind of waves here and there. So there's a ton of drama in people's lives, and that can influence the mindset that they bring into this training session, but also even just their energy. They might just be worn out from stress. So maybe their food is adequate, their sleep is okay, but they're just stressed, high strung, so you have to really be careful about that. And really, there's not much you can do with a client struggling with stress, so you're not going to be able to fix their problem. So you're not, magical, and can't answer everybody's issues. So the best thing you can do is just be a listening ear So take 5 minutes at the end of the session or something like that, or 5 minutes at the beginning, and let them kind of, spill the beans, let them just kind of confess or like rant or rave or whatever they need to do to get the stress out. Just talk to them a little bit about it, but set a timer because very often it can just turn into like a therapy session. And as much as they might need the therapy, they also need physical therapy. You can still train and talk. So set a timer, give them maybe 3 to 5 minutes to say what they need to say, get it off their chest, and then say, hey, you know what? Let's talk some more, but let's do it in between the exercises. So let's do an exercise. I'll set us like a 1 minute or 2 minute break. In between there, let's keep talking about this. I want to help you kind of figure this out. But that way it gets you moving and you still get some physical stuff going. Okay. So what you can do is provide advice where you can if they're willing to take it. So you can offer to be their accountability partner. So if you kind of say, hey, you know what? I need you to really start eating a little bit better. So I need you to have a meal before you come in and train. So let's try having a breakfast. Here's some foods that are kind of good ideas. And then I want you to kind of take this chart. So we can also offer them adherence tracking and say, hey, I want you on this chart. Check off every day you have breakfast before we train. Let's see if we can get up to 3 days a week. Just try having your breakfast. Once you get good at that, let's try 4 days and 5 days. But you want to offer accountability in some way. They can check in with you via text or email, or just kind of tell you every time you have a session whether they did or didn't do good, and you can remember to ask them the question. You can also offer adherence tracking, just some stupid little chart or something that they can kind of check off for the day that allows them to see if they're making the behavioral change. It also allows you to see if they're making any changes. And we're going to get more to that here later on. But that's going to be the biggest things to do with the outside of the gym factors is food, sleep, and stress. Okay, so offer some advice if they're willing to take it. Offer to be an accountability partner and offer some form of adherence tracking, so that way they can see if they are making the change, and then you can also see if they're putting in effort to make a change. So what can we do, kind of ourselves as trainers, is we can kind of look at the workouts themselves. So one option we have, something that we can control, is to lessen the workload. Meaning that if the person is not eating well, they're not sleeping well, and I've had some cases where, let's for example, maybe somebody's going through some marital stress, and at the time being, they're going through a custody battle with their kids. If you have the fear of losing your kids, your workouts don't mean shit. So these people are going to be overwhelmed with that fear. So you try to get them eating as best as they can. You try to get them sleeping if they can at all. And they're not going to get rid of the stress, but you can at least let them talk about it when they're with you. So you can make some degree of changes with the first things we talked about, the outside of the gym stuff. But then when you're in the gym, okay, if you know that that person is already worn out, they're not operating with a full system. So they don't have the good food, they don't have good sleep, and they have high stress. What you might need to do is kind of bring down the workload, bring down the intensity. So this can be done in a billion ways based on whatever's best for that client. But sometimes, if you typically kind of say you have a technique style where you typically do a couple like warm ups getting to a hard set, then you have one all out max effort set. And you're like, there's no way this person's fueled for that. They're not even going to do very well at it. So the quality of that one set's going to come down. Well, then what I might do is I might say, hey, you know what? In my mind, I'm going to get them a couple warm ups. But let's do 2 or 3 top sets and maybe, aim for like a 9 out of 10 intensity. So I'll have them do 10 reps of a weight. I know they could probably do 11 or 12, but we'll do 2 or 3 sets. So that way you're not pushing them to an absolute max, which is not going to be there that day. So if you know that their quality is down, you can maybe increase a couple sets. Another flip turn would be is if the person kind of like if they normally have a fast-paced workout and they kind of do a lot in their training, you might say to yourself is they're not going to have the energy to kind of bounce around doing this. We're probably going to need a little bit longer breaks because they're not fueled well, they're tired. So let's do a couple warm-ups. Let's do just one kind of hard set for the exercise, and then let's move on. So that way I can kind of bring down the workload and give them longer rests. So you can see how, depending on the person, you can make the complete opposing changes, but they can be correct depending on what that person's needs are. So it kind of depends on the person, but that's one option you have is to lessen the intensity of the workload. You still want to make it like a good workout, okay? And you might even want to add, in more learning. Like maybe you're going to teach them in like not a new exercise that's really technical, but just teach them a new concept. Say, hey, I wanted to kind of let you know today as we're warming up why we do the warm ups the way we do. So it kind of helps build up like adrenaline, like endorphins. It kind of helps us get our technique down for the top end sets. So you just talk to them a little bit more about what you're doing, but very calmly and not highly technical stuff. So you don't want to try to overwhelm them. Another thing we have is to change the workload. So if you have exercises that are highly technical, okay, and or ones that are mentally stressing. So maybe you do strength-based training with somebody and on their programming you have like a 2 rep max plan for the day. Well, if they come in underfed and they're not even in the right state of mind, there's no way I'm going to put somebody under a barbell for like a 2 rep max squat because it's not going to go well. They're going to underperform and or get hurt. So sometimes you need to change things. So maybe that day, even though the program says for max effort like a single or double or triple, you might say, you know what, we're either going to swap this out for just some sets of fives, maybe 5x5 to get their volume in, or if they're not even like mentally ready for squats at all, maybe we'll just switch out squats for leg press. So sometimes you have to make those kind of changes to the workload. So we can lessen the intensity, or we can kind of change what we do. So those are a couple options we have that you as trainers absolutely have control over. And then the other thing we have is kind of addressing the mindset. So if somebody's coming in and they're just having a shit mindset, meaning like even though they have all this stuff going on in life or whatever might be causing the slumps, but they're like, woe is me, baby, 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 whine, 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 cry, cry, cry. So that's some stuff where sometimes I'll share stories of other clients, and I don't ever share names, and I try to make sure they never know who the hell I'm talking about because it's not fair to share people's personal stories. So, but if I had somebody before, like they said, like they're getting ready for a contest, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just so worn out. Like I just don't think I can do this. Like I got my kid, and it's just running me ragged trying to take care of all that." And then I'll say like, "Well, I did have somebody in the past. Like I understand your stresses." So there's this one guy. He had 2 jobs and had 6 daughters. We were still able to do a show. He was definitely running, ragged all the time, but he got his structure right. He got his food right. He made his food more convenient. He made kind of like schedules in his phone. He asked his family to help him adhere to his schedules. So you kind of give examples like that of people who maybe have had it worse than them, and that kind of can toughen them up a little bit and say, well, geez, if a guy with 6 girls could do it, I'm sure I can too. That kind of thing. So that's one idea of kind of just like sharing stories of people who maybe have been through more. So that way, if they're in that ho hum sad as me, it can kind of break them of that a little bit. Sometimes they'll get angry and they'll be like, well, that person, they didn't have this, this, or this. So it does help the more people you train, eventually you'll have a story for every situation. So I've trained well over 1,000 people. So whatever makes you think you're special, I promise you, I already know somebody who overcame it. So, but that's what you're trying to do is try to get them out of that sorry for me kind of mode. And you can even talk about the things they can't control, what's good for them, So, like for example, say if they're not a single parent, they have a spouse. You can say is yeah, it's tough, getting ready for a show. It's tough dieting. It's tough trying to make training, a regular routine. But if there's anything you're struggling with, like if you talked with your spouse about it, maybe there's something they can help you through with this period. If you only have to do like 10 or 12 weeks left of your diet, maybe they can help you for the next 2 or 3 months. And then maybe you can trade and do something for them the couple months after. You guys are married, your teammates, your partners in life. Why not be, open to communication and ask them if they're willing to help? So that kind of stuff can help. You also have if people just come in like angry and bitter and grumpy about life, that's hard too. But again, you try to think of like gratefulness. So anytime you can bring things back to like gratefulness and seeing what they do have versus what they don't have, that also helps. So if you have somebody who lost motivation, so we have a ton of podcasts about motivation. So one good one is 259, podcast 259, titled Renewing Motivation Revisited. And it gives ideas about how to renew motivation. So if there's somebody who's just lacking motivation, that's something that can help. So I had a guy come in and he was kind of like ho-hum bummed about his training. He was a little bit older, like in his early 60s, I think. And he's just like, what's the point? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, why did you eventually, like, why did you first start coming? And, what was the reasons that got you motivated to try to live a healthy lifestyle? Like, what was important to you? And it was, like being around for their kids, walking the daughter down the aisle, being there for their wife kind of thing. And I said, well, why don't we take a note card? Okay, take an index card and write down the top 3 reasons why you should work out every day. And then I want you to tape it to the visor in your truck. And when you get to the parking lot, I want you to flip the visor down and I want you to read these 3 reasons. And don't come into the gym until you're ready, until you recognize why you're coming into the gym. So that's an idea. And there are tons of other ideas in that podcast 259. But it's something where sometimes you have to kind of talk the person through it. So if they're ho-hum down as me, try to make them realize what they do have control over, what the good points are, tell them about people who've overcome bigger things or the same thing that they're trying to overcome, give them hope, basically. So if somebody's coming in anger and bitter, that's a little bit, that one pisses me off more. So, because, yeah, it's just, everybody has a tough life. If you want to be an asshole about yours, that doesn't make you anything special. So, but that's something that's tougher to fight against. But I usually try to be like super friendly and happy. So I try to like annoy the shit out of them by being as happy as I can be. So that way you can calm them down. If somebody's angry and bitter and you just join in, yeah, life sucks, this and this and this happened to me yesterday. Oh, congratulations, you're both just going to be, negative Nancy's and, shit on the world. So, but the best thing to do is to kind of fight them back with positivity. It annoys the hell out of them, but it calms them down. So, but that's basically the things that we can control as trainers is, like I said, the first thing you can do is kind of address outside of the gym factors. See if you can help them improve their food, their sleep, or their stress. And the stress is more so just being a listening ear. And then what you can do in your training sessions is to maybe lessen the workload or modify the workload to better match what energy they're bringing into the session. So if they're super angry and pissed off, give them something to go nuts at. So, put them on an exercise that's safe, maybe like leg press, and say, hey, this is a weight that we normally do for 20 reps. I want to see if you can do it for 30 today. See if you can step up and, put all this freaking anger and like this rage into this exercise. So let's crank out 30. Let's freaking crush these weights. We can't walk around punching people in the face. We go to jail. So instead of beating up people, let's beat up these damn weights. Let's go. Come on, see if you can get 30. So you can kind of like use that as a way to kind of modify the workload and kind of get them to work out some frustration and anger. You can do circuits and supersets, wear them out aerobically. So if they have that anger, frustration energy, use that stuff up. Use it to your advantage. And then you can change the workload. Like we said, if they're not mentally ready for a highly technical exercise or something that might be putting them at risk, swap it out for something that's safer, okay, or less technical. And you can address their mindset. So there's tons of like mental mindset like books out there and podcasts, and we have a ton of them too. So you can just Google search like Brutal Iron Gym podcast mindset, and there's every one out of every 4 podcasts we do almost, so it'd be almost 100 podcasts on mindset. So there are tons of helpful things out there, books and resources and whatnot. Then the last thing I want to cover is if their slump is prolonged, meaning that nothing's really changing, they're not even trying to make progress. So they just come in with that bad attitude or the negative energy every single time. Nothing's really changing. They're not even doing anything. Then you may need to drop them as a client. Now, the biggest fight back I get from trainers when I tell them this is, what are they going to do without me? Oh my gosh, you're not that special. Okay? Don't become an enabler. If their time with you, okay, isn't improving. So if the slump has been prolonged, if they're not making any changes, if nothing is progressing, then clearly the time with you isn't changing anything. More time with you won't change anything either. They've already had time. They've already had opportunities to make changes, and they're not. So by you staying with them does not help them, and it hurts you. Sometimes people need the slap in the face or the awakening of you leaving them to actually wake their ass up. So I have left clients, I've fired my clients at times, and I remember one was a person who came in who was just negative Nancy all the time, like saying they were always tired, always everybody kind of taking advantage of them, people doing this to them, people doing that to them. They were just like they were the butt of the world, and nothing they ever did, would ever change anything. So we would talk. I'd always try to have a positive attitude. Sometimes they'd leave in a really good mood. Sometimes they'd stay in the bad mood throughout the whole session. But nothing changed. And I mean, for like a year. So I tried my best. This is back when I had more patience when I was younger. But nothing changed. Really nothing at all. And so I had to drop the client. And I remember when I did, it felt like somebody took 1,000 pounds off me. It was such a freeing feeling for me to not have that burden on me anymore. So I'm telling you guys the advice in this podcast because I was the person who took too much responsibility on myself. I thought I was in charge of everybody's problems. And I realized that I'm not. And I was just beating the shit out of myself emotionally by thinking I was. So I'm learning, like, I learned all these things myself. So anytime I'm giving you guys a podcast and calling you all dumbasses, it's because I was a dumbass first. Okay? So, but I remember I dropped that client. And did it have a financial hit? Yes, it did for a temporary time, but I was able to replace the client with another person or two who came with better mindsets, who were more eager for the help, and kind of got a positive feeling again of making a difference in somebody's life. So with that previous person, nothing I did meant anything. Nothing I did changed anything. So you just feel defeated, you feel tired, you feel worn out, you feel just like, in a slump yourself. So I had to drop the client, but by me dropping him, it really woke him up. Like, he was like, holy shit, Rob's... I'm relatively a nice person when you meet me in person. So he's like, holy crap, if Rob got tired of me and had to drop me, I must be something wrong here. So the person kind of cheered up a little bit and is doing better in the gym and personality-wise and whatnot. So, but I've had another person, they were coming late all the time. Like, out of 20 sessions, they were late 9 times. So I remember this stuff because I tracked it all. And they would come in, they would bitch and whine as we got through our warm-ups. They wouldn't want to do anything. I'd be like, okay, let's do this. They're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, what the hell did you show up for? But I didn't say that, of course. That's what I thought. So I remember I dropped that person, and they got super angry, sent me a text telling me I was an asshole and full of myself, and, like, blah, 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 blah. And that did not end well. So not every story ends well. So that person... I don't have a clue. I don't know what they think of me anymore. I don't communicate with them much anymore. Well, at all, really. So sometimes it doesn't work out well. But when I got rid of that person was replaced by somebody new, excited, and wanting for the help. So the person actually took that person's slot was somebody I've been working with for a couple of years now. And we've made a huge positive difference in their life and their family's life. So by me getting rid of the one negative Nancy who was never going to change, it allowed me to take my knowledge, efforts, and my kindness and passion and anything I have good in me and be able to bring it to somebody who is willing to use it and ready for it. So don't lose your gifts on somebody who doesn't appreciate your gifts. Okay? So ultimately, you can support your clients, but you can't control their lives. So you are not responsible for changing them or changing their life, but you can definitely present options for change. So be compassionate, give them time, but also guard your own heart. Don't allow their negativity to make you negative. Don't allow their negativity to make you burnt out. Don't allow their negativity to negatively impact all of your other clients. Okay? So have compassion. Remember when you struggled and you had moments. So in the initial onset of their slump, don't get frustrated with them. Have compassion. Understand that you've been in slumps before too. Okay? Give them advice, ideas that maybe you use to get out of your struggles, or clients in the past who maybe have been in similar situations to them, what they use to get out of their struggles. So be compassionate, give them advice, and then be patient. Give them time to make the changes. Do the accountability partner thing. Do the adherence tracking thing. Give them time, but track it. Okay? So maybe you're going to say, I'm going to give them 8 workouts and see if we can make this any better in 8 workouts. So give them a time frame and be patient with them. But then ultimately protect yourself. So set a date for when the slump has to be making some type of improvement. They have to show action towards getting out of their slump. And if they don't, drop the client. Take your gifts, take your passion, take your love, and put it into someone else's life. It does not mean that you're abandoning that person. That person isn't even using you. Whether you're there or not won't change anything. But you can change the next person. Okay? So I wish you the best of luck. I hope you never have to deal with this, even though you probably will. But clients will get in slumps, okay? So just recognize you're not responsible for that slump. You're not responsible for changes. You can present them with changes. You can offer opinions. You can give advice. But ultimately, it's up to them to make the difference, okay? Not you. Cool. Okay. If you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so I want to know what you want to learn about. And you can tell us at our email at brutalironGym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful. And thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.